Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you may be listening. Welcome to today's Information Week webinar, How to Build Scalable Compliance and Risk Management Programs, sponsored by and broadcast by Informa. Terry Sweeney here with Information Week. I will be your moderator today. Just a few announcements before we start. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, and share this webinar on social media. It's also where you'll participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of the presentation today. The slides will also advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the slides using that same resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, we'll also be asking you to provide feedback using the survey widget found at the bottom of the screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before you leave us today. Your feedback provides valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the help widget found at the bottom of the screen. You can also type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. As a reminder, the information, views, and opinions expressed during the webinar are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of their respective employers, companies, or organizations. The speakers participating in this webinar are in their individual capacities and not as representatives of their employers. So let's actually get on with the program today, how to build scalable compliance and risk management programs. As you can see, discussing today's topic is Aidan Collins, Director of Strategic Accounts at Hyperproof, Tyler Angle, Solutions Architect at Hyperproof, Rishi Singh, Director of IT Risk at a Fortune 500 company, and Stan Soshinsky, Principal IT Risk Analyst at a Fortune 500 company. To learn more about our speakers, you can find their bios in the speaker bio box on your screen. And again, if you want to ask our speakers any questions, please use that Q&A box also on the right side of your screen. Gentlemen, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Terry. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. We're super excited that you're joining us today. Here's what we'll plan to cover in the next 50 minutes or so that we have together. In order to paint the context for why scalable risk management and compliance workflows are absolutely a necessity now, we want to look a little bit at what today's complex compliance landscape looks like. And all of you in this audience, I'm sure, are well aware of the challenges that you're facing, and be assured that they're replicated across many, many organizations. So we'll spend a minute looking at what's changed, what's different, why is it more complex now than before. One of the key drivers of this complexity and then the resultant work that comes from it is a desire to have greater visibility and communication. So we'll talk a little bit about that really as an outcome. And in order to have that kind of visibility and communication and make it a priority, what are the kinds of processes, workflows, tools, and technologies an organization should have in place? We'll pivot then and talk a little bit about what are the attributes of this broad class of tools called GRC tools? What are some of the functions and features within those that you should be looking for? And how do you think about those in terms of optimizing their work for scale as the requirements of the organization grow and change? And then we'll wrap up with some learnings from the panelists around what have they looked for? What have they found that's valuable? What lessons have they learned as they've gone through evaluating and choosing tools? And then, as Terry said, we'll have some time for a Q&A towards the end. To echo what Terry said, if there are questions during the presentation, please do provide them in the Q&A box, and there may be some of those that we can address as we're proceeding through the presentation. Otherwise, we'll endeavor to get to them towards the back end of the presentation. With that, let's paint this picture. I'm going to ask Rishi Singh, who's on our panel here today, to talk a little bit about this idea of complexity of compliance. And at least intuitively, we have a sense that, yeah, it's harder, there's more to do, but why is that? So what are some of the factors that is driving this complexity and this amount of work that we have to get done. Rishi, how would you respond?
Yeah, thanks, Aiden, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. So Aiden, I'm thinking that, as a risk professional, risk practitioner, as we probably have some folks on the webinar today, we've seen over the past few years that global compliance is really in a constant state of increasing evolution and maturity, right? And a lot of this activity is really being driven by new risk vectors. We're having geopolitical occurrences, or having a knock-on effect on really stronger defense posture, companies bolstering their cyber defenses, including regulatory and privacy practices. So let's spend a little bit of time today on some of the new global regulations and also existing ones that are increasing in maturity, right? So let's go back a few months. Under the US current administration last year, we had the introduction of the EO, Executive Order 14028. We have new cybersecurity defenses that are coming through the federal government that companies are going to be required to comply with if you're in critical infrastructure. We just had the Restrict Act out in early March that many risk professionals are still mulling over. The SEC I think, is overdue now to roll out regulations this year. They've been in draft so far around cyber board presence, having someone on the board of directors that has a cyber insurance background or cyber security backgrounds. We're keeping an eye on CMMC, the CMMC AB, and anyone in the DIB, Defense Industrial Base. They're going to have to get ready for that. That's coming out if you have any type of aerospace and defense prime, subprime contracts. PCI 4.0 is also out. That's been through changes. So anyone taking payment cards, you're going to have to get ready for that. We also have changes to ISO 27001. Version 2022 is now out as well. So anyone in the ISO 27000 world, has to get ready for that as well with changes to that control framework. And maybe what I'll do is I'll let Stan talk about ISO 27001 for, maybe a minute or two, because he's a big practitioner in that space.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rishi. And of course, anybody who's in the governance, risk, and compliance space, you probably heard of changes, right, that happened in 2022. So definitely complexity is there because you're managing 2013 version. Now you have to conduct your gap assessment and compare it to what changes actually occurred. So, that work needs to be done and documented and controlled, absolutely. So, back to you, Rishi.
Yeah, thanks, Stan. Yeah,
Rishi,
go ahead.
Sorry, Rishi, I was going to pick up on what you said, and then your comment to Stan as well, and Stan's comments. I mean, this idea of just a whole lot more stuff, generally, I think is the first reason that this complexity that we talk about is being driven. And then the second piece that strikes me is that it's coming from different sources. And you called out a couple there, Rishi. You said you mentioned the executive order. Talk about the Restrict Act. You talked about changes in frameworks. We see with our customers additional frameworks as they move into new markets, or state privacy requirements get upped. The other piece, and you touched upon this as well, Rishi, is the work that the SEC is doing, the exchanges are doing, the NACD is doing on really up-leveling the understanding of security and compliance at much higher levels in the organization. And one of the key themes we called out at the very beginning is this idea of communication and visibility. And you can imagine, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the reporting requirements into your newly installed cyber expert on the board is very different to Stan's communication with whomever it is that's doing his ISO assessment and who's ever program managing that within the organization. So I think it's the volume piece of it, and then the disparity of sources, the difference of the sources, the difference of what they're looking for. All that feels like that makes this even more complex than just more stuff.
Yeah, Aiden, I think as an analogy to your point, IT GRC teams historically, including even some regulatory teams in many corporations, were kind of shoveled to the back end of a business back office, right? And they really weren't front and center with the business. But a lot of what's driving this is contractual obligations, right? So, for example, in order for you to sell to a regulated entity, tying that contractual obligation to a potential sales pipeline that you can't effectuate because you don't have that specific compliance in mind now affects the business revenue generation. That's a big change. Years ago, it was like, do you have an ISO 27001 cert or SOC 2? Because maybe that was part of just doing business from a risk assessment perspective, ensuring that the supplier was safe. Did you have a record of data breaches? Have you had a material disclosable loss? Now it's in a contract, right? And I'm not picking on CMMC. I know we have people on the webinar that are probably in the DIB, defense industrial base, but you're seeing it in other areas as well. So by tying that into the sales pipeline, you now have industry GRC professionals front and center helping to support business revenue generation activities.
You know, Richie, that's a really good point. Tyler and I were talking with a new customer recently, and they had somebody on the call who's in the GRC team, whose title was Market Entry Analyst. And I'd never seen that title before. And so I was curious and asked, obviously, what does that person do? And what they're doing is precisely what you just described there, Rishi. They're looking forward. They're interfacing with the business and saying, what might be the markets that we're entering into next? What might be the customer sets that we're dealing with next? Do they have compliance requirements? How do we get ahead of that? And one of the things we'll talk about towards the end of our session today is the importance of reuse of work, both in terms of what we're currently meeting, and then if we're looking to meet something new because of a new market entry, new customer requirement, how ready are we to do that? So that part around being able to look into the future, be able to see what we will have to be able to do, all of that, to your point, Rishi, is becoming faster and faster. The other part that strikes me, and we see this with many of our customers, and it's something, Rishi, you and I talked about at the very beginning of our conversations, is the recognition that so much of the information that we need to be able to have visibility into, so much, many of the systems we need access to, so many of the data sources that are important in forming an opinion around compliance and assurance and controls, they're hard to get at. Talk a little bit about how that impacts you just operationally. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think, Aiden, I think this is all about exposing the work, right? So if you look at my first point that I just stated around traditional GRC teams and, you know, kind of compliance teams kind of being more back office functions and working in silos, data silos in Excel or office products, pick your poison, whatever it might be, there was never an easy way to expose your risk posture, your control objectives, your narratives, your structure, your status of your program to the business, right? You can't walk into a business meeting and pull up a 900 column, 900 row spreadsheet. It doesn't work, right? And you have people building, you know, Power BI dashboards or whatever it might be to try to give a status of your program. So I think what the business is looking for today is they don't understand the complexities of regulation, nor should they have to. That's why they have people like us working at the respective companies, right? But they do expect you to have some level of visibility, transparency, understanding, and a level of acumen in your respective areas to say, are we compliant, are we not? If not, what is your trajectory? What's the vector to get there? How long is it going to take us? What controls are outstanding? What help do you need from us? Is it funding? Is it support eminence? What do you need us to do, right? And traditionally, it's been very difficult to expose that in traditional, I would call them Excel collaboration type applications, right? They're just not suited for them. So I think part of it is the reporting and exposing the work. And when I say exposing the work, I'm talking about a finely curated exposure to the business in terms of here's your dashboard, here's what we have left, here's what's outstanding, and it's 6.5 months to get there, right? Typically, you know, I use the phrase, be brief, be brilliant, be gone with the business. And that's what you need to do as compliance professionals more.
Yeah, no, that's eloquently stated, Rishi, and it just, again, ties back into this idea that we have more stakeholders that are different than we've had before. And to your point, I think you and I were talking the last time I've been on the receiving end of some of the risk reporting in my role as a board member, a couple of companies, and chair of an audit committee. And candidly, oftentimes that left me feeling dissatisfied. There's not quite enough there. Everything can't be that good or alternatively that bad. And so there's a nuance in the communication and the kinds of information that you want to share and the story that you want to tell. But having access to all of that information is critical to be able to build those stories, to be able to extract just what's relevant and timely for that stakeholder and nothing more.
Yeah, so I think, specific to the slide around the questions that GRC professionals are getting asked, traditionally, GRC stakeholders have put together things around various charts, right? Reporting charts saying, let's remove green, yellow, and red, and let's do degrees of red, right? Let's try to use factor analysis of information risk. Let's be fancy and use numbers and try to do quantitative versus qualitative, right? At the end of the day, the business doesn't understand risk metrics presented in such a manner. So you have to curate that to the understanding, to use your analogy, Aidan, when you're a board member, you probably wanted to hear the 5-minute pitch on a couple of things. One is, what new regulations are we subject to? What's upcoming? Because it's not just present. It's today, GRC professionals are expected to have their pulse in the ecosystem of changing regulations. So is there something new coming out of China with MLPS 3.0, right? They're at 2.0 now. Is there a new PIPL coming out for personal information protection? Is there a GDPR 3.0 being developed, right, et cetera? So there's the forecast and there's the present. So the questions that leadership asks are really very binary, which is, how are we doing in terms of preparation? When do we expect to be compliant? First of all, do we need to be compliant? Does our risk-based approach and risk-based posture necessitate compliance? If we're not compliant, what's the negative or even positive, right? And then I think the other part we see as well, Aidan, is using, as we all know, compliance is not security, it's got a piece to do with it, but can compliance effectuate the business being able to play in riskier markets quicker and faster, right? So for example, CMMC was kind of a first out of the gate run. If we're compliant and can get the big prime and subprime contracts, do we have a leg up on revenue generation, right? So the questions that stakeholders are asking now is, can compliance lead to more sales? In the past, it was, we don't want to spend money in compliance because we don't have the sales to support it. Now, compliance GRC professionals are getting asked the inverse question, which is, what work do we need to do to get this before anyone else? And is it a value creation, a value proposition differentiation in the market for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who lives in sales, I understand that very, very personally and very directly. The other piece of it, I would say, Rishi, you mentioned risk, is as a board member on the receiving end of reporting, I'd also like to know about, how our risks getting bigger or smaller? How do we compare with others? Not necessarily at a very fine level, but certainly at some gross level. Are we broadly similar to others that are in our industry or in our segment? Are we making decisions that are increasing or decreasing risk? Are we seeing risk being mitigated over time? So all of that together starts to build that richer story that's relevant for those kinds of senior stakeholders. The other place that I want to go with this then is that, and this is something we hear all the time with organizations that we speak with, and I think, Stan, you're at the receiving end of a lot of this in your role, that you're not adding more bodies to your team when there's a new framework or new standards being added. That's not happening. The business has a bit of a blind spot in the sense of, we want you to do more, but we're not going to add more bodies to it. And so with any vector of growth, to Rishi's point, you're going to have more to do. And so how do you manage that more to do?
No, absolutely, Aidan. And of course, you mentioned you can't really expand your team horizontally. You need to be able to actually scale your work, and kind of with limited budget that each compliance team is actually presented. You need to use automation. You need to use available tools to continue to kind of scale your program and build out your functionality, if you will. So, for example, as part of the ISO 27001, as Rishi indicated, we have multiple locations that we have to manage, right? And as we continue to mature our program, we bring new business units, different business functions into the program. And so with limited number of people on the team, how do you actually manage that? So absolutely, automation, tools that create visibility and gain efficiencies, that's all going to be helpful to GRC teams.
Yeah. And just to pick up on that last point that you said there, Stan, visibility. And we mentioned this at the beginning, and I still think this is a key area that many GRC teams in the past haven't done as well as they should have done and have paid the price. Because candidly, there's parts of the organization, leadership that doesn't fully understand the breadth of work that's going on, its complexity and its importance. And Rishi, you said this, I think, in one of our earliest conversations, you have to have the ability to have a lot of detailed information that's applicable to different stakeholders, a way to view all of that in one place and then filter it up, dashboard it as is appropriate for those different kinds of stakeholders. But having that single pane of glass, an ability to look at all the stuff that's going on around compliance and being able to effectively manage it and report on it is something that we see very, very important to our customers.
Yeah, Aidan, just philosophically, I think one of the legacy approaches that, decades ago, GRC professionals have was let's not expose the business to too much risk, right? Let's not give them too many risks on a dashboard because then we'll spin them up and have to manage irrational reactions to where we are in the program, right? I think with the new paradigm shift around cybersecurity, compliance, and risk, there is definite benefit. First of all, GRC professionals don't own the risk, right? Our jobs are to evaluate, risk assess, publish, and deliver the fact where they are. So if you have a single pane of reporting for your compliance work, it does a couple of things. First one is the story is what the story is. This is where we are today. To your point, Aidan, that you made about 2 slides back, trend lining, right? Are the risks getting better? Are we working on the right risks? And then there's risking the risk, right? Which is in the program, are we focused in the right areas? And it's very hard to do that with compliance silo gaps around data presentation models. And I don't think any conversation today can be complete without talking about the ChatGPT and Bard elephant in the room, right? So when Stan mentions automation, what do we mean by automation? It's a big keyword that gets thrown out there. How about automation to manage our cloud security posture if MFA or password configurations have changed, right? Traditionally, your auditors would inundate you with requests for screenshots, right? We've all lived that world, some of us being former auditors, which is they live in screenshot havens, right, of delight, which is give me hundreds of screenshots, and every year it's hundreds of screenshots. Now you multiply your regulatory complexity and compliance frameworks, you're now dealing with maybe a couple thousand screenshots that you have to finally curate and file away, right? So if you work out of a compliance platform that you can show there's continuous monitoring of specific configurations, maybe you'll never be able to get rid of all your screenshots, but if you can cut that down by 50 to 70% and give the auditor a view into the platform and your risk program, that has immense benefits because, as we all know, Aidan, being former auditors, the screenshot collection piece is a massive drain on people's time. The GRC team now needs to manage relationships with other teams to go get that information.
Yeah. Now, you touched upon something, and we'll get into a bit more detail on that next, is not only is that inefficient for the work that we do as a compliance team with the auditors, the other piece of it is that it's highly efficient for our colleagues across the rest of the organization. We're oftentimes asking them for stuff that we may have already gathered because we had some other purpose or somebody else may have asked for. This whole idea of audit fatigue is real. And the other thing I say is, and I'll talk to leaders in compliance and assurance, you don't want to be the person that's running your organization on spreadsheets. You're not the cool kid on the block if you're sending out spreadsheets for people to fill in. It doesn't work like that anymore. You're not able to engage with your colleagues in a professional way. So not only the efficiency point that you mentioned, Rishi, for our team, the efficiency across the organization, And then honestly, the posture of this being something that is important and critical to the organization and should be managed and communicated very clearly and very openly, to your point, in a way that all of the stakeholders, kind of wrapping around where we started. The visibility is key. I mentioned the presentations I would have received as a board member. I like having dynamic dashboards. I want to ask questions about, show me more about this thing. Let me dive in there. And so we'll, for instance, work with many of our customers around building and enabling that kind of dynamic dashboarding and reporting. And then I love what you said, Rishi, being transparent, being open. These are hard problems to solve. There should not be an expectation that, yeah, we'll get it done. No, we won't. These are hard. And so that all leads us into really understanding then, having painted that, hopefully not too gloomy a picture, but certainly a challenging picture of where we see organizations are at. How do you start to address this? And Tyler, I'm going to pick on you if I might. You've led many of our customers through the evaluation process of both Hyperproof and other tools. There's a lot out there to look at. And so maybe you can walk us through, and I know that you'll ask Stan and Rishi and myself to input as well, but walk us through how organizations should be thinking about addressing the range of issues that we've brought up using technology.
Sure. Let's go ahead and jump into it a little bit then. So as you just mentioned, I talk to people every single day. And if we're going to be totally honest, most folks in the GRC space are still performing their compliance work in spreadsheets today. And something I'm commonly asked all the time, right, is how can we make this work more functional? Because what they're doing today is just it's not satisfactory for different business users, right? So then why would we want to go ahead and seek out a solution? And importantly, what efficiency gains are we looking for too? Is it automating various GRC functions just around our controls specifically? Or is it, as Rishi and Aiden have already alluded to, something relatively simple, just like inviting our auditor in to use a platform, right? We can start to see a lot of efficiency gains there. And it really might sound silly, but something I talk about every day, right? It's just setting a repeating task to perform some of these manual tasks that, folks need to accomplish, right? People are just taken back at how simple something like that could be, right? And how much of a burden it's taking off of their shoulders. So really, and as Rishi mentioned a little earlier, one of the biggest pain points that I'm seeing every single day, right, is folks just struggling to collaborate amongst themselves. Really, that's the biggest part. Automation's great, but you can't automate every single control, right? So we still have a lot of work that needs to be accounted for, and it really all starts with collaboration. Perfect. So I think we can probably move on to the next one there. And just again, automating some repetitive manual tasks, right? So of course, we're surely going to have a lot of ongoing manual compliance tasks, right? So why give ourselves more stress when we can start to build out some of these automatic calendar reminders, right, within a GRC solution so that we can efficiently and effectively stay on top of the tasks that need to be done, right? So maybe, Stan, I'd probably look to you a little bit more, and Rishi as well, if you have anything you'd like to add in, because maybe I have one way of how I look for this, but if you could tell us a little bit more with, some of your extensive experience within the GRC space, how have you dealt with a lot of this repetitive manual work in the past?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, Stan,
go ahead, Rishi.
I think I'll take that first. Thanks, Stan. So, Tyler, I think, just from a high level as a risk director, one of the things I look at when I evaluate GRC platforms is their methodology for managing, the governance, risk, and compliance. The ones that are more inflexible, that make you fit into their methodology, I typically see less success criteria in firms adopting those, because what I've seen in the past, and I've been doing this for, a little over 2 decades, is that there's many GRC products in the marketplace that force you into their kind of rigorous methodology, and the lack of customized flexibility now becomes a limited factor in the platform adoption, which turns into you managing your risk the way they want you to manage it, right? And I think anyone in this webinar would agree that any company that comes in to your house and says, this is how you should manage your risk, from a consultative perspective, that's fine. But once the platform does that, maybe that's not how you work, right? So the flexibility is the first one. The second thing I look for is in this kind of multi-scale cloud adoption, I'm looking for a cloud-first product. And obviously for people on the webinar, your risk appetite, risk tolerance may be different. You may want something on-prem. But I'm looking for companies that keep up on frameworks, quicker adoption, quicker release cycles, built more from a cloud-first perspective, where you're not behind the 8 ball when a new framework comes out or a new risk metric, new risk scoring methodology you want to use, right? How fast can releases and feature enhancements be done? I think those are the two. There's more. We can talk at much length about that, but those are the first two I think about. And then I'll let Stan contribute his thoughts as well.
Sure, no, absolutely. When we are actually looking at the tool for our team, right? So we said what are the features that we need to have within the within the platform. So we said that program level visibility absolutely is a must, right? Because yes, we have different frameworks that we use, so you don't have to actually remember what kind of frameworks you're using. The platform is showing you as a program, you have the following frameworks, right? And then speaking of frameworks, how many frameworks does a platform actually provide within the application itself, right? Obviously, you need to look for the ones that you need to comply with, the ones that you need to implement, but maybe think about the future, right? What's something else coming down the pipeline, and is the platform able to support and onboard that framework quickly enough, right? Rishi touched up on the flexibility of the platform, so customization. But it could be a double-edged sword because yes, the custom functionality allows you to create needed fields and needed functionality within the platform, but it also adds complexity when you implement, right, and maintaining forward. So you can kind of think about this as you plan your and select a tool. Business hierarchy. I think that's critical for a large organization, right? Because we have multiple business units. Is the platform able to support multi-level business unit hierarchy, right? Just for tracking and reporting piece, and of course, ease of implementation. I think I touched upon the customization. So if it's a complex platform to implement, do you have the support from the vendor? Do they have training available, right? All the videos, formal training, and I think those are the key kind of key elements that we looked within the platform. So as a bottom line, flexibility, scalability of the platform. As you continue to mature and build out the risk and compliance program, does it allow to grow with the program, right? Does the tool allow you to grow as you continue to build it out? So a couple of my thoughts.
Incredibly well said. And just on that point too, I mean, it's important to have the depth of the frameworks needed built out immediately, right? And as you said, Rishi, it's not a one size fits all for everybody, right? So having those customizations within the platform to support not only maybe nuanced ways that you want to handle your compliance, but as Stan, you said too, being able to support multi-product or multi-entity compliance too underneath one roof is incredibly important. And generally around different customizations, when you hear that, you might think professional services too. Well, not so much, right? We need something that's easy to customize and also easy to implement too. So probably just what I want to add there. Aiden, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on Rishi's comment. I like that framing, Rishi, of kind of how you go top down. We have sometimes a tendency to get into the weeds, as we will. But I like the framing of what's important to you. And then Stan, the way that you characterize it out as program visibility being critically important. What Tyler just touched upon in terms of the ability to mirror the org structure, because every organization is different and every stakeholder in those different parts of the organizations likely wants different things. And then the customization flexibility, but doing it in a way that doesn't involve significant professional services or one-off engineering kind of work to maintain the upgrade path and the path forward with the product. And all of that is like a magic place that you can get to. And I will say about our approach to building a tool has been to give you a place to start and then grow with that. And so I like that framing. I like that ability to be able to say, top down, here's what's important. And now let's get into some of the key functions, some of which are They may appear obvious, but the lift that we get from doing them is quite significant. One of our very first customers at Hyperproof would spend about 4 hours a week calling people to remind them to do something in advance of an audit. And as much as he enjoyed, I'm sure, calling people and reminding them, we built our very first unusual feature called Freshness, which was to remind people to do stuff. Sounds simple and sounds trivial, hugely powerful, and takes a huge work burden off of many of our customers. So what I've learned in this domain is that there's a combination of relatively simple stuff, but it's still important. And then we'll get to some of the more complex functionality that really allows you to scale more rapidly as well. So starting here around just automating manual tasks, again, sounds pretty straightforward, but I would argue, San and Rishi, is a huge lift.
Yeah, I think part of it, I'll just go back to your point around professional services. And I think from a customer perspective, the GRC traditional suppliers have failed us all. Professional services to me is a failure scenario, right? Obviously, you may need some PS service hours to get things trained and up and running. And I'll counter Stan's point around training. While a very good one, I'll also invite everyone in the webinar to think about how much training do you need to actually get into the platform and realize, have value creation immediately, right? What is the time to market on value creation for your investment? Because as we all know, we don't have unlimited security or compliance dollars. Some folks on the webinar may work for larger firms, maybe better funded with programs in terms of budget, but professional services is an evil axis for many compliance programs because it turns into an increasing OpEx line that many risk professionals just can't support, right? So year 1, year 2, year 3, as PS keeps going up, you have to ask yourself, am I paying for R&D or am I paying for PS? And how much of that is the company investing in? So when I looked at the landscape, the ecosystem, PS was a big one for me. Having used traditional GRC platforms, Aiden, where PS was baked in, shipping in 3 or 4 consultants to work with you for 6 months, does not work in today's digital transformation and cloud-first GRC environments. It's a very legacy approach, and I'm kind of glad to hear that Hyperproof doesn't take that approach.
Yeah, thanks, Rishi. And I wonder if I should only be slightly offended that as a former consultant who made a fine living doing GRC work, I might add, I find myself in a very different place now. The other kind of theme that I want to bring out is that, and I see this with compliance teams a lot, and especially in larger organizations where the difficulty of being able to engage with somebody who's in IT or in engineering or in HR or finance for their very limited compliance tasks. And maybe we're asking them once or twice a year to do something, or they have to review something, but it's not part of their day job. It's extra. And we want to make it as easy as possible for them to do it, because if we don't, we end up doing it ourselves. And I see this all the time with compliance teams where they're doing more of the work that should be out in the organization in the hands of people who actually know the content of specific controls and environments. But because it's difficult to do that, they end up doing a lot of this work themselves. So one of our themes has always been to democratize this work, make it easy for somebody who has to do something for us once or twice a year to go off and do that. And so I would argue, and Tyler, you can back me up on this, in that one of the critical attributes of any tool has got to be easy to use for non-users, for folks who are outside this hallowed world of compliance.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, as you just said, it's all about, getting that work done, right? Democratizing that work. And in a solution, it needs to be easy to use, because not everybody in that platform is necessarily going to have a developer background, right? Should be pretty straightforward. I've got my compliance, my risk posture easily identified. I can click into various applications within the platform and quickly get a summation of the various information that I need to look at quickly, and then report against that. Also, on that same point too, as you just mentioned, right? How do we quickly and easily engage with various stakeholders within a platform, right? Those various SMEs that are responsible for such critical information, right? But then how do we also not only engage with them, how are we working to verify that we have both the necessary and correct information being provided to us. So, and this is one of the things, Stan, I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit more, if maybe you could elaborate on, maybe do you have a vision around this? And traditionally, how have you handled this in the past?
So of course, in the past, it's working outside of the platform, right, that we implemented. You send an email, you schedule a meeting, you work with them, but obviously gain some efficiencies when you assign tasks directly from the platform, right? We're not there yet with the platform. I'm going to be open, but this is on our plate, and this is where our future state is, right? As we interact with different teams, as HR, with security teams, with engineering, etc. We kind of do the stakeholder management, and we show, okay, here's the tool that we can use. It's going to centralize all of the issues, all of the findings, all of the evidence, and this is where we can actually work and track everything. So that, absolutely, it's going to be time savings and efficiency gains from all the SMEs involved in the process.
And Stan, I like the fact that you said you're not there yet. And I think that's a really important point. I think sometimes we might have the idea that this is a magic bullet. We'll buy some cool tool, we'll employ it and deploy it, and suddenly the world's a perfect place again. It's not. It doesn't work like that. I think, and Tyler kind of outlined this earlier in terms of the progression around, first of all, getting organized, getting into a single place, understanding the current workflows that we have and that we need to have for whether it's evidence gathering, audit preparation, reviews, whatever those tasks that need to get done, and then mindfully engaging with stakeholders over time. And I'll tell our customers all the time, the platform should be easy to use, easy to get into, and easy to start with, but don't let that simplicity of use undermine the challenges of getting organizational change done. It still is hard to do and still needs to be done very moderately. And so again, Stan, to your point, the idea that you're taking this one step at a time, you're working through, you're showing what you're building, you're showing your work, and then you're able to engage those stakeholders in something they'll feel good about, and we'll be able to respond appropriately.
And I guess, Aidan, just to add that it's gonna take culture change, right? Because some other teams, they're using whatever applications, whatever tools that they use, they like storing everything on SharePoint or what have you, right? But obviously, as we interact and continue to mature our processes, maybe we can show them, okay, look, this is going to save you time. This is going to be more efficient, right? So yeah, it's going to be maturity over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way you've expressed that. One of the things, for instance, we think a lot about is that there will be some organizational resistance. And so let's not fight too much of that. And a great example is what you just described there, Stan, where you might have a part of the business that is used to responding to an audit request by putting it in a shared drive somewhere. That's what they've done. So let them do that. And then let's use our technology in a smart way to pick that up and automatically ingest it into the tool, deploy it across the various controls or audits. That business team doesn't need to change if they don't want to, but we can make our part of that process a whole lot more efficient by using good technology.
Yeah, and Aidan, I think one of the points there around culture change is when people ask, why did you invest in this platform? Yeah. I use 3 words: protecting your time, right? And they appreciate that immediately, because one of it, the quickest way you drive culture change is you don't schedule meetings with people to gather evidence. How many times have GRC professionals become really high-end EAs, executive assistants, scheduling meetings to do walkthroughs, take screenshots, video captures of a specific business process, right? So now stakeholders are asking Stan and I, what do you need? When do you need it? What format do you need it in the platform, right? And then Stan will go ahead and use the platform to collect that evidence. And they get used to it, right? The first time is always the hardest, but the second and third time it becomes second nature.
That's a great lens to put on it, Rishi. I don't think we oftentimes use that enough broadly in organizational change, but specifically in this area. I mean, as much as we all love and adore the world of controls and compliance, strangely enough, the rest of the business doesn't always think the same way. And they see this as something extra that they have to do. What you just described there, Rishi, saying, let me make your life a bit easier. let me show you that I understand, but I'm asking you to do something that's out of cycle and out of channel for you, but we need to do it. Giving them a good way to effectuate that, I think, is hugely powerful. And it builds a level of goodwill and cooperation that oftentimes, we don't always see. So kudos on thinking about it like that. I want to bring us almost full circle to this idea of compliance and reporting again. We started as one of our key themes being focused around visibility and the ability to be able to talk to differing stakeholders with different information that's timely and relevant to them. It's a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but I'll say it anyway, and maybe Stan and Rishi ask you guys to comment on the importance of being able to get away from generating ad hoc PowerPoint presentations from a myriad of different sources, and knowing that the presentation you'll do to the CISO next week will be different, but use some of the same information as the one that the audit committee wants to see 3 months from now. Has that been an important part of your decision making around tooling?
Huge. From an executive risk director perspective, I'd say, people say, hey, Rishi, what's the most valuable cybersecurity tool? PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, right?
It's used to get budget. It's used to do your presentations. It's used for audit committee eminence, right? But how much time do we as risk professionals have to spend on interpreting CSVs, Excel sheets, spreadsheets, pick your favorite Office product, and then having to generate a finely curated presentation for the target audience, and then making another dashboard for another target audience? Then you've basically become a digital media shop for PowerPoint production, right? So I think the centralization is hugely important. The other thing too we touched on earlier in the presentation was around spreadsheets. Well, auditors are now auditing the spreadsheet history trail and saying who changed it, when was it changed, why did they change it? As you know, spreadsheets are not the ideal place for keeping some of that historical information. So as you're looking to centralize compliance and risk reporting, think about trending over time, velocity, temporal changes, right? Can we reflect that on a dashboard? That doesn't have to be real time, but perhaps near real time, as we know controls take time to get implemented. But tracking that change and maybe just doing a control shift one with your favorite screenshot program and dumping it into an email or a PowerPoint that's already created because you're already using a digitized transformation platform for GRC, then you're off to the races, right? Because of how many times is it a late Thursday or Friday night getting ready for that Monday morning board or AC committee meeting? Like, hey, now I've got to go create a huge PowerPoint deck and make sure the graphics and everything are receptive to the audience. So it's going to be a massive time savings.
Yeah. And I'm also fond of saying I made a fine living using PowerPoint as a consultant too, but not averse to having better ways of communicating and more dynamic ways of communicating. And I think that's the other thing I get excited about, that transparency in reporting, Rishi, is truly engaging with leadership and saying, here's where we are and here's where the issues are, and let's drill into it. Let me show you the stuff that we have to deal with in a very transparent, open way. And that more dynamic conversation is not enabled by even the best PowerPoint presentation, but it is enabled by actually a live view to what Stan said, right? A live view into the information we have, into the work that we're doing. Being able to do that and having the confidence to do that, I think is hugely impactful. The last area I want to
maybe.
Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe to take on and elaborate a little bit more, just to add on a live look, right, into various areas within our compliance journey, right? Well, in my head, that brings us back to some of the earlier points that we were talking about around Jumpstart, right? At least what we call Jumpstart. But getting back to scalability and really stressing how incredibly important that really is. And as I touched on a little earlier, generally see a lot of folks within spreadsheets, right? Well, that means that they're not really thinking big picture and what's to come, right? They're focused on the upcoming audit. And they're not exactly reusing controls, right? We've already done that work once. Why would we go duplicate it again in another framework, right? So what we can start to do with what we're calling Jumpstart here is create a central point of truth within our controls, right? Not only that, but we're getting more of a live look into some other various frameworks that we might not be operating on today, but we're getting, again, that live picture into, well, how much have we already accomplished? And basically, what's our gap assessment and how much left do we need to go? So it's giving us a good look into maybe some different regulatory requirements that we weren't, originally thinking about pursuing. But now we've realized it'll be a relatively low lift and light burden on the team, but it could open some new doors for some new business to us. So it gives us a good look into something that we might want to explore next.
Yeah. And I put this here towards the end of our session because we see this a lot, that the inability to reuse work is a huge problem. And we have to be able to do that more. We all know intuitively that even though as we look across different standards and frameworks, there's an overlap. There's commonality across controls and audits and programs that we're managing against, but we oftentimes treat them very differently because of the timing of the activity or the third parties we're dealing with. And so the ability to be able to very specifically look at a piece of work that we've done on a control, for instance, and say, I can use this in all these different places, and being able to show that clearly, being able to report on it, and then by extension, look at the gaps that are in this new area that I want to get into, what work is left to be undone. And maybe Rishi and Stan, I'd love your thoughts on, my sense of it is that much in the past, we didn't have the ability to be as well organized around reusing work. Now, to your point earlier about being able to engage with our stakeholders more efficiently, we want to be able to do that. Is this an important element as well as you think about being able to get more efficient?
Yeah, absolutely, Aidan. I mean, if you look at it from, if you're investing good SG&A dollars into a digitized platform for managing compliance, why am I the one that has to take the onus and bear the burden of putting in the framework that is standard, right? We expect that to come from the provider, and not just the standard. But for example, one of the reasons why hyperproof was also a selection criteria was they understood CMMC very well. Many vendors stop at NIST 871. They don't understand the assessment objectives, right? So how well is the firm that you're potentially contracting with understand the compliance landscape? Do they have a CISO that understands the nuances of the frameworks and what makes them tick? The jump starts are the acceleration, or the agility for the framework to get embedded and quick start out the races to get moving with the program. The reuse of the controls and all of the objectives and the narratives and all the evidence collection is vital, because if you're doing CMMC, PCI, ISO, whatever it might be, there's significant crosswalks between all of these frameworks that you can reuse specific evidence from. So why go recreate another SharePoint factor or directory? Reuse the evidence. I'll leave you with one closing thought around digitization of GRC today. I think in 2023, this is more from a larger business system ecosystem observation I have, is you're going to see an intense and immersive change around automation, right? Outside of IT. So many of the large language models that you're traditionally hearing about, like ChatGPT, BART, et cetera, these were traditionally restricted to ivory towers of academia. They're now accessible to business people, and regardless of your risk appetite, what you're doing with them, the business has had robotics process automation for years. They're now looking at where it makes sense to automate business processes. So then here shows up a GRC professional with an Excel spreadsheet, right? You've immediately created a disparity between you and the business. So think about, I'm not saying go automate everything, but think about what your business partners are doing in this space. How can Jumpstart be an agility generator for you? How can it be an efficiency gainer? And how can you use automation, even a piece of automation in your program? In the past, the business used to be behind IT. In some ways, they're catching up or surpassing IT traditional shops because of what's going on in the industry and automation. So I would invite everyone to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective and well stated. One of the reasons I imagine that folks may have attended this morning is to learn about not only the domain and what's happening there and what are some of the options around tooling, but also Rishi and Stan, I'll ask you guys directly on this. You've been through this process. You went through it relatively recently. Talk a little bit about, if you would, about some of the lessons that you learned. What would you want to pass on to folks that are now maybe thinking about heading down this path?
I think I took some of Stan's thunder from the previous point, so I let him take the get the accolades on this one. So Stan, I'll let you go here.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you, Rishi. Of course, define the scope, right, of the GRC platform. whatever you're trying to implement. Obviously stating the obvious, but yeah, define what exactly you're trying to do. Align the implementation with the organization business objectives. Like what frameworks, maybe take the easiest one, or maybe take the well-documented one. For example, we use the ISO 20001 because that was very well documented, and we use that to build out all the controls, right? And then we can use the jump start to do the gap assessment and kind of plan out to build out of other frameworks. And of course, stakeholder management, right? Get a buy-in from stakeholders, involve them early in the process, and kind of gather any of the concerns that they have and try to address them as soon as possible, right? Focus on data quality, ensure accuracy, completeness, and up-to-date information, right? If you're moving risk tracker from a different platform into the new one, make sure that all of that documentation accuracy is in place. Talking about customization of the platform, right? Define what exactly do you need to achieve, customize that to whatever the specific requirements your organization needs. Training, of course, Rishi touched on the point that the platform needs to be easy, but of course, make sure that you train your teams, make sure you train your users on the specific GRC platform, key features, etc., right? And of course, monitor, evaluate, and upgrade your platform. Make sure that you continue to meet your needs and objectives. So those are the kind of key points and lessons learned, if you will, from my side.
Good. Excellent. All right. I think we're coming to the top of our time. My thanks to our fellow panelists for their time today. My thanks to the audience. Terry, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Aidan. You guys are really great job. You've managed to provide us both breadth and depth on a very complex subject, two very complex subjects, compliance and risk management. Bravo to you all. Before we've got just a few questions. I'll try to be brief here. I think this one would best be aimed to Aidan and Tyler. Talk about a bit how long these platforms or solutions take to implement. What can listeners effectively expect there? And if you could also maybe allude to a few of the challenges that typically arise in the implementation of these things, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, great question, and an important one. I think maybe even Stan or Rishi may have an observation as well. Rishi talked about path to value and time to value. The way we think about implementation is in the first 30 days, we should be able to show you a good chunk of value. We've got to get to a place where you're able to see and demonstrate some of that. So we have an intense 30-day focus to get customers up and running. As much as we love these kinds of platforms, I've been around large-scale, long-term GRC implementations. Candidly, the organization loses interest. And so we have to be able to get up and show value relatively quickly. Not everything done, but being able to show an organizing structure and principle, being able to show some reporting, being able to show tasks and workflows that are well-defined, and to what Stan said earlier, to be able to show you, yeah, we have 6 months of work to do to get to point X. So kind of quick answer, Terry, I'd say, is a hard push for 30 days to demonstrate value, and then layering on top of that all of the other desired outcomes following on from that.
Yeah, I'll add one quick point. Was when we were migrating into Hyperproof, my directive to the team was you need to move with reckless speed, with guardrails, of course, right? Freedom within a framework. And the part of that was how fast can Hyperproof move as a company doing an install? Well, the platform was ready for us to go. Whether we wanted to spend 12 hours or 2 hours a day on it, the velocity of attainment was up to us, not them. So Aidan, fantastic point. I would just add that when I look at a GRC provider, they better be able to move as quickly as we can, which is 1 or 2 meetings, onboarding, accounts, SSO setup. Let us have at it, right? Other folks may need more time because they may be newer to this area, but I think that's the success criteria I look for. And Stan, if you want to make a comment there too.
No, just I would say 3 to 4 months, and we could probably pass an audit, right? from start to finish. And of course, it's continued to improvement over time. You continue to build out evidence, continue to build out your configuration within the platform. But yeah, it was a fairly quick implementation.
Good.
Well, unfortunately, we have bumped up against our time. This always goes much faster than we expect, but that's going to have to close us off for today. Aidan, Tyler, Rishi, and Stan, Information Week appreciates your time and expertise on compliance and risk management. Really, really appreciate the conversation and the perspectives that you guys shared today. Bravo, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyperproof, as well as to everyone in the audience. We appreciate your participation and attention today. Sometime within the next 24 hours, you'll be receiving a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. You're free to share this with your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to or attend today's event. This webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by Information Week and Hyperproof. The individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Hyperproof, I'm Terry Sweeney. Thanks again for your time. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.